If a storm meets a storm, that's okay. The one thing that we can do if there is a rupture or if we strain that relationship or that connection a little bit, we can go back and repair it. We can always go back and we can always repair it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast. My name is Fergal Fox and today we're speaking with some colleagues from a primary care, Sláinte Care funded pilot project called Acela in South Dublin. Now, I have a mix of colleagues here and I'll tell you a bit more about that later on, but we're going to be talking about teenagers. This podcast is going to be very interesting for parents of teenagers, and we're going to be talking about all the things that are going on in those teenage, adolescent years, in particular anxiety. So this is a very, very useful podcast for any parent, I think. So I'd really like to welcome my guests now. We have Rosemary Kavanagh, speech and language therapist. We have Niamh Garvin, occupational therapist, and Myrne Tracy, clinical psychologist. You're all very welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Fergal.
So we're talking about teenagers and adolescents, anxiety. What's going on in these adolescent years? I don't know. You tell me. What could be crazy?
I think a lot of us remember our adolescent years as kind of a tricky time.
Yeah.
It's probably a time where there's a lot of rapid growth and a lot of rapid development. It's a time where you're developing not only biologically, physiologically, socially, emotionally. There's a lot going on in school. You're entering those kind of state exams, which cause a lot of pressure and stress. Socially, you're becoming more independent. You're taking that step away from your parents, and your peer groups begin to have, I suppose, a big impact on you and a big part of your life. You're becoming more aware of kind of social events and world events. And there's a lot going on in terms of trying to search for that independence and that sense of self. So you're starting to test those boundaries, push those boundaries, try new things. And on top of that, you've got all those hormonal changes and that huge period of brain development that goes on. You're starting to make lots of new connections neurologically. And some of those ones that you're not using gently fall away, and you're creating this whole pattern, this whole new sense of being for yourself and how you make sense of the world. I think as a parent, you're starting to have to step back, and that causes that parental anxiety. So you not only have your own anxiety that you're managing, but your young person is stepping out into the world, and that can be a very anxious time for them.
The way you described, I don't know how many changes you described there.
Yeah.
That is the most busiest change time, those teenage years, is it? Is there any other phase in life that it throws so much at you, is there?
Yeah, there's so much going on. And I suppose just to pick up on some of what Myrne said, when we think about language development, we think about young kids and all the kind of early stuff that's happening. But actually in the teenage years, there's a lot happening with language and communication development as well, which can make conversations between parents and young people trickier because you have to kind of move with them. So they're learning in adolescence. Yes, their vocabulary and sentence structure, etc., is developing still. But what's more important is they're learning to use language to negotiate, to persuade, to argue. They're learning about sarcasm. They're learning about satire. So we kind of have to, as parents, move with them and learn how to communicate with them and meet them where they're at instead of treating them as younger children. So that can bring a challenge. And then when we think about anxiety and emotion, so that kind of vocabulary of emotion, that's developmental as well. So children don't get it all at once. So they're learning about this gradually. Some are learning a little bit faster than others. So we need to kind of think about that as well when we're sitting down to have conversations with young people about their emotions and about anxiety.
Yeah, I can't help thinking about my own teenagers when you're talking there because it's just like example.
Yeah.
Just flipping through my weekend.
Yeah.
But you mentioned they're sitting down talking to them about their emotions. That seems like an abstract thing to do. It's nearly like you need something to talk about. And then you talk around it, do you? Niamh, what's your thought on that?
It do. And I suppose with teenagers as well, we're almost doing the same thing that we did when they were babies, but in an age-appropriate way. So if you think back to a teenager, they want to be grown up, but they still need some of the things, the comforts and the reassurance around that anxious period that they had when they were children. We're thinking back to the environment we had for a child. It might have been quiet, calm, soothing. But teenagers are out there and they're being bombarded with social media and change and pressure from school. So sometimes as parents, we're back to trying to recreate that calm environment at home where it is safe for them to begin to have those conversations. But it's not a sit down at the table conversation. It's more like drip feeding along the way. And the best time to have it might be at a time when you're in a car and your teenager isn't even looking at you. That you can start to have those conversations and think about how you can support your child.
Support your child in the teenage years. That's the key, isn't it? And there's so many topics that we have discussed in the past in the podcast when it comes to parents and young people that is about nearly enabling that conversation. We had the exact same piece around talking about sexual health and relationships. You need to build, as you said, you need to develop an ongoing relationship with your child.
You do. It's a whole family environment almost, and everybody is part of it. And a big part of it, I think, is being the detective and tuning into your child
Yeah.
and knowing when is the right time, what do they need, what do they seek, what do they avoid. So that all comes into it as well. Being able to almost press the pause button when things are going a bit mad and step back and look at your situation and see what's happening for your child at those periods when the anxiety is starting to build up.
So let's talk a bit about anxiety in particular then. It's a real hot topic for a lot of parents. And in my perception is that there's even been a kind of a build-up of the concern around anxiety post-COVID. I'm not citing any evidence on that, but that's just what I keep hearing. The parental chat, not just the HSE talk conversations that I have, that the parental conversations are a lot about, how did your child cope and how did they get on and how are they now? And that some of the support structures may be varied. So can you take us through that?
I think you're right. I think post-COVID, a lot of services saw a surge in referrals because if we think about what happened during COVID, our world became unpredictable. What's that fertile ground where anxiety breeds? It's when life becomes unpredictable and we're not in control. So on a basic level, what is anxiety? It's a very normal part of life. It's something that everybody experiences. We need to tolerate a certain amount of anxiety to help drive us, build skills, push us forward for keeping us safe. So we think about where it kind of arises from. I like to think of the brain as kind of an inverted triangle, and at the back there, that's our emotional center, and that's our kind of survival brain. So if we think way back to when we were the cavemen, we needed that survival brain, that threat system, in order for us to survive. We still have that threat system that's there. And when we're anxious, that's the part that gets activated. So we talk about those automatic responses where it's fight, flight, or freeze. So when we are perceived with a threat, or there's a threat in our world, or our world becomes unpredictable, we slip back into that survival brain, and that's where we're activating from. And I suppose what's really interesting, when we're in that part of the brain, which is where anxiety can come from, we're not using the front part of our brain, which is our thinking and reasoning. So again, when we're asking people who are anxious to, think about it now, is that really going to happen? Or we're flooding them with language, they can't get to that place because they're in that threat part right at the back of the brain where they're in that survival mode. So like I was saying, anxiety is a normal part of life. I like to think of it like a light switch. When a threat comes into us, it goes on, it protects us, it does its job. But for some people, it stays on. That switch where it's meant to be turned off doesn't quite turn off, and anxiety can become all-encompassing. And that system that's telling us actually you're not in threat anymore doesn't ease, it doesn't come down.
It's interesting the way you describe that pushed anxiety as nearly like a primal thing.
Yeah, it is.
I've often thought that we don't even often share our anxiety response. It's like when I have that anxious response, I think, this is just me. Nobody else has felt like this. So we don't often normalize that, you're going to be really stressed. This is what it's going to feel like. And you're switching off some of those rational thoughts.
You're right. And you know what? That keeps it in place. When we don't challenge our thoughts or when we hold those anxious thoughts in, we then create almost this narrative in our mind that actually that's definitely the way it is. And we start to see threats all around us. And if we think about some of those physiological responses that we have, they're also evolutionary. They're part of that survival. So for me, my heart was pounding coming in here this morning. And that's because my heart wants to get blood to all my organs. So if I want to run out of here, I can do that fairly quickly. Or we get sweaty palms, which is a really common one. And that helps us. If a predator comes at us, they're less likely to catch us because we have those kind of sweaty palms. So there's an evolutionary body's response from an evolutionary perspective to help protect us. So the role of anxiety is there, I suppose, to protect us against threat. But it's when it starts to misfire or it starts to stay there for longer periods of time when it's not needed, or when it starts to misread everyday normal situations as really threatening. That's when it can become tricky.
Yeah, that's good. So everybody's going to experience stress. It's a good and natural thing. And it's kind of going to get us up and get us into action.
That's it, exactly. And I suppose what Muireann's talking about is the emotional reaction to stress and anxiety. And then we have to think about the whole mind-body connection and that sensory piece as well. For example, if you put your hand on a hot plate on the cooker, you're going to pull it off very fast because you've felt the heat. So there's a sensory aspect to a lot of things as well, that protective piece. And looking at a little bit like we mentioned earlier around the environment and what sensory strategies we can use. And back to thinking about our baby again, we might rock a baby from side to side. So we've brought movement in there. We might hug them. So we've brought deep pressure in there. So we're using those body sensory strategies as well. But how do we do that in an age appropriate way for an older child? We're not going to pick them up and rock them from side to side. So we're still encouraging our young people to find those age-appropriate ways to help them calm their anxiety in a sensory way. So it might be, for some young people, it might be sports, that rough and tumble in rugby or swimming, the feel of the water on their skin. It might be the repetitive movement of running. It might be, for younger teens, maybe even hanging out of a monkey bars on the playground. So all of those things are that deep pressure that we might bring back to that rocking a child from side to side. But now it's an age-appropriate way. So we're looking at the environment as well at home and thinking about clutter, decluttering, I know is something that's very topical at the moment. But it's about giving that young person a space at home where they can be in that calm space and they can be allowed to regulate themselves as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm still thinking through.
Back to your teenagers
back to my
again.
own teenagers, yeah. Because everything you're saying, I can say, yeah, sport, yeah. The sensory, when I hear the word sensory, I think of materials and touch. The examples that you're given of sport, I think there's so many examples of that where, you see your child out training and you want them to be exhausted because you want them to, push themselves and try and get useful exercise.
Absolutely.
And that's bringing them into that zone and getting into flow.
But you're right about touch as well. In the old days in schools, we used to say children had to sit still and be quiet. And now we say no, give them a wobble cushion to sit on. Give them something tactile in their hands, even if it's only a piece of blue tack. And giving them something that's tactile is also calming for the system. So you're absolutely right with that. There's a whole range, even visual. You might think about reducing the light in the room, or in a classroom, you might reduce some of the clutter on the walls. Sound, you might be looking at background noises. For some children can be very, loud noises can really trigger that stress response, can't they? So you might be looking at using AirPods or loops or something to help calm the noise in the environment as well. It's a really broad thing. Sport, I suppose, is the most easily accessible thing for children who are interested in sport. But if you don't have a sporty young person, it could simply be going out walking. It could be running. It could be
drawing,
it could be baking. It could be anything like that that really engages the senses to help them calm.
So this is a means of calming, and you're relating that back to primary instinct as a parent-child of rock. That's amazing that I didn't really see that before.
We have an instinct as parents to jump in and try and solve the problem as well.
You're instinctively kind of recognizing these are truths and are good things. But actually, as parents, and I think when I have teenagers myself, we get kind of overwhelmed with the need to kind of help them and fix them. Where we go straight to sometimes is talking and asking questions and sitting down, having a big conversation about it. But as Muireann said, they're in survival mode, like their thinking brain, and language is part of your thinking brain, that's switched off. They're not capable of having a conversation. So bombarding them with questions and maybe possible solutions is actually not a helpful thing to do in that moment. While they're in that moment, they need to just regulate. And you'll talk a little bit about that Bruce Perry model where we go through the steps. So it's kind of worth just trying to remember that as a parent, just pause, actually. Just pause. Say nothing. Just be with them.
So what we've established already is that adolescence is a really challenging, tough time with peak changes. They're coming every which way at the child. And it's normal for the parent then to be having some anxiety watching that, or trying, as you said there, trying not to get your hands dirty in the problem, step back or pause. So that anxiety, if you're anxious because you can see your child is anxious, like I've heard from a lot of parents, as I said, not as a parent talking here, not as my HSE voice, but like to see a parent talk about their child anxious is just like, it's intense. And you just feel for the parent and you think, oh my God, they're just at their wits' end. So let's keep that parent in mind now. And what should we be telling them about their child's anxiety? The range of anxiety, what does that look like?
The range of anxiety goes from that kind of mild, where that's that normal day experience of having moments that cause you anxiety, having maybe a difficult moment with a peer, to an exam situation, which maybe tips up to the mild to moderate.
Yeah.
But it's when it stays and that internal alarm system is constantly ringing, constantly seeing threat, and it can't come down. And it impairs the young person from doing things that they should be doing, going out with their friends, going to school. They become slightly more withdrawn. That's when it's tipping over to that point where a parent's concern is going through the roof and they might need a level of support and intervention. Like Rosemary and Niamh both pointed out, there's a lot that the parent can do in that situation. And it is going back to that piece of just pausing and being with them. From my perspective, I kind of look at things a lot through an attachment lens. And I think having that connection, whether it's a young baby or a toddler, right up into adolescence is the key. Because if you have the connection with them and if you can keep that, that's where you as a parent can start to help them navigate this.
The relationship.
The relationship,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. It helps them navigate through the difficult situation. Rosemary touched on it there, that 3R model. And that comes from an American psychiatrist, Bruce Perry. And he talks a lot about trauma, with trauma being one of those big emotions that causes a lot of anxiety and lots of complicated feelings. And he again inverts that triangle. And he says, when we're working with a big feeling like anxiety or something that somebody's going through, we first start with the regulate. We start with the body. I myself know, even though I know all this theory, I go to the talking and I have to remind myself it's the being. It's not having the answers. It's not trying to fix it. It's just staying with them and regulating. It might be creating some of those sensory experiences that Niamh was talking about, going for a run with them, going for a drive with them. Then we move up to the relate, where you can start to bring in a little bit of that language. You're not trying to fix it. You're not asking those why questions. You're just sitting with, you're understanding the experience from their perspective. You're not challenging it. And then we move up to the next place, which is the reason. And that's where we can bring in that gentle challenge, challenging some of those anxious thoughts, challenging nobody likes me in school, I can't go in there tomorrow. But we have to move up through that way, because if we think about the brain in the way I explained it at the start, we're moving from that lovely survival brain up through the brain, up through the thinking systems to a place where we can then talk to them. But because they're adolescents and they're so verbal, like you were saying, Rosemary, and their language is becoming so rich, we can sometimes skip all those beats and go straight to the talking.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
What was the first R again there?
The first R was regulate.
Regulate, okay.
Yeah, so regulate, relate, and then reason. But that process of working up through that is not, we'll say, in an hour. It can take a long time to get to that place.
No, I can see so much of Rosemary's example there of me jumping into what, when, where, why. Let me solve this.
Yeah.
And actually with communication, I think with all age groups actually, but, particularly thinking about this age group, the listening part of the communication is way more important than the talking part. So we sort of forget about listening. So in terms of communication, so listening to what they're saying to us, maybe, as Muireann said, in that relate stage, paraphrasing it back to them like, oh, it sounds like that was really tricky for you, or just empathizing, not trying to put a layer of meaning on it for them. That's not their meaning. That's your meaning as a parent. You're trying to put words in their mouth, but just listening to them, meeting them where they're at, and really thinking in that relate as well about the non-verbal communication. So again, when we think about communication, sometimes we just reduce that down to words, but the estimates are kind of between 70 and 90% of communication is non-verbal. So, what is our body language like? Are we looking kind of calm when we're sitting with them? Is our face calm and soft and approachable? Or are we looking really worried and, the way we're feeling inside?
Yeah.
So we're trying to kind of regulate our own bodies to communicate through our body language, through our facial expressions, through our tone of voice as well. Is our tone of voice, is it nice and calm and steady? Or is it, when you're anxious, our tone of voice, our rate of speech, it all kind of gets escalated. We start talking really fast and maybe a bit louder than normal. So we want to kind of try and bring all that down in our own communication, use a nice calm voice, a nice slow rate of speech. So that's really going to help your teenager to relate to you as well, and to kind of feel that you're there for communication, you're open to them for this chat.
Yeah, I was kind of scolding myself listening to your model there, thinking I've jumped in so many times too quickly and just created more anxiety in the child. But it sounds like that gentle pause. Parents need to regulate yourself before you go in there.
Totally.
100%. When our calm meets their storm, that's when co-regulation occurs. And just to say to you there, Fergal, it's important to be compassionate to ourselves as parents. We're not always going to go into these situations regulated. And sometimes part of our role is taking a step back for a minute, taking a breath, tagging somebody else in. Because we're anxious, like we've said at the very start of this, we want to make things okay for our young people. We remember adolescence, well, I certainly remember mine. And you want to go in and you want to protect them from that. So we have to be compassionate to ourselves as parents and just take that pause, take that moment and step back. If we get it wrong, if a storm meets a storm, that's okay. The one thing that we can do if there is a rupture or if we strain that relationship or that connection a little bit, we can go back and repair it. Sorry, I overreacted there. I kind of came at you there with loads of questions, or, I got a big fright actually when you came in and I reacted to that. Saying that to our young people models to them, we can make mistakes. This is how mum regulates herself. She takes a step back. This is how dad regulates himself. And it also shows them that no matter what happens, we can repair that. So even if our anxious brain is taking charge of us, we're hypervigilant and we do something or react in a way that maybe we regret, we can always go back and we can always repair it.
Yeah, that's great advice. That piece that you said, you need to encourage the parent. I remember one of the parenting program that we used to have in the Midlands, the Triple P program, and it was always about positive parenting, staying positive. I find that it's so easy to forget that message, that if you start off negative, you're at nothing.
And you do have to practice what you preach. If you're trying to encourage your child to adopt some, whether it's a sport or whatever it is that they're using, we have to be showing that ourselves. So maybe we need to go out for the walk, or we need to download the yoga app on our phones. And we need to be the ones also showing, oh, it was a really bad day at work today. I'm fed up. I've got this thing on tomorrow. I'm going to actually go out for a walk for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it is. And coming back to your child and saying, actually, I'm feeling a bit better now. That helped. And being able to say that without putting any pressure on the child to follow suit, what we're really doing is tuning into ourselves, tuning into our children, and, as Muireann said, showing them how we manage, how we come back and repair relationships, but also how we manage our anxiety.
So it's like the relationship I see, your emotions, they're like the invisible ties you have to your children in your family house, and you don't see them all the time, but they're there. And sometimes it's only when there's a problem you think, oh, look at this, it's not good enough, or it's not right, or my child is not happy. And it's such a wound to a parent that we need to work on our own emotions.
And we're only ever striving to be the good enough parent.
Yeah.
There's no perfect parent. There's no perfect way to approach a situation. And like when I say the good enough parenting, that's not mediocre. We're doing a great job being the good enough parent. And that involves being really compassionate for ourselves and acknowledge that, like you were saying, all those invisible ties. But if we think about the adolescent, imagine all the invisible ties that they have outside the family system, that they're growing and developing at the same time as trying to manage the family system. Like, that's really tricky. All the communication, all that goes with that. Like, they have a lot going on in their world.
Yeah. And I think it's even more challenging when you mention that, those ties, when you think of social media and the communication challenges that child has or living in. You don't know where they're being bombarded with.
And technology obviously has huge challenges, but also brings advantages in terms of communication. So if it is really tricky on a particular day to chat with your teenager, or in a particular week or in a particular month, use their technology, send them a text message. They'll know you're thinking about them. So we can use those things as well to kind of help build those connections and keep ourselves in their little world.
Get on their wavelength.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well.
Or send them a photograph.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do that with my teenage daughter. I send her a photograph and we never talk about it like in real life.
Yeah.
She'll send me back a message saying, oh, usually with several exclamation marks. And that's it. But like, it's a little moment of connection, I suppose, during the day. It's really important to try and meet them where they're at and use their forms of communication as well.
Yeah. You're showing her that you're thinking about her.
Yeah.
Yeah, without saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So let's talk. Is there any other practical strategies that we need to highlight for parents? All you've shared already is very valuable. The model of regulate, what's the second
Relate.
one?
Relate.
And
I
reason.
was going to jump at reason.
And with the reason, I suppose it's useful to be solution focused there. When I say solution focused, I don't mean presenting a list of the solutions that you think might be good solutions. I mean, really talking with your teenager and helping them come up with their own solutions, because they will be able to. So remember, the regulated, this could be the next day or a few days later, right? We're in. So it's not kind of in the same space where they were doing the regulation relate, but maybe asking questions. So if they're worried about something like an exam, for example, they're saying, I can't go in, I can't do it, I'm not going to be able to. Saying something like, tell me about a time when you managed to sit through an exam before. How did you manage that? Getting them to think, they'll say, I don't know. Okay. But then you pause, maybe after 10 or 20 seconds, they will answer. They'll come up with something. That's typically what will happen. So they have these resources. So we're trying to pull the resources out of them. They have the resources. We all have the resources within us to manage lots of these everyday anxieties. But we just need to find them and remember them and try to apply them to a new situation.
Yeah, it's nearly like you're reminding me again of counselling tactics, coaching tactics, where you're building on something you did. Remember the time you did this and you didn't think you could? And then I was so proud of you, the way you went at that challenge. If you're able to pull on those examples.
You're helping them tolerate uncertainty.
Yeah.
Life is uncertain. That's one of the things I've learned working with adolescents over the years, is that we need to build our capacity to tolerate uncertainty, to tolerate the unknown. We can't eliminate anxiety. But like you were saying, Rosemary, if we can pull on some of those skills where they previously managed, that helps them tolerate that. And it helps them see, okay, I can do this. So again, it's not about getting rid of anxiety, but about building the skills that they already have to manage and to tolerate it.
I often think of the Leaving Cert as a necessary peak stress
Yeah.
that we put our teenagers through in Ireland. Every year there's a debate about, is this crazy? Some kids find it really, really challenging. And you just feel for them. It's like, oh, you're going through this performance test. You're just psychologically all over the place, and it's not fair. I always thought, like, this is just, it's the way it is. You have to jump this hurdle, or you can take different forms of the Leaving Cert, obviously. But when I think of the teenage years, I think of, like you said there, you can't get rid of anxiety and uncertainties. If you're going to keep going forward and keep growing, you have to jump certain hurdles, I guess.
You also maybe have to adjust your expectations a little bit, because sometimes we can't determine the reason why a child is struggling so badly. And sometimes it's about, okay, well, we just have to park it. We have to go through it. We have to co-regulate, sit with that problem, let the time pass. What's our plan here? It's not about getting 600 points in the Leaving Cert. It's about being able to get out of bed in the morning. So sometimes it's about adjusting that and coming back down to the level that the young person is able to tolerate. And maybe it is just getting up and having their breakfast and going for a walk around the block. And then maybe they'll go into school in the afternoon if it's a school issue, whatever is going on. But I think there's a little piece there around, we want the best for our children. We want them to succeed. We want them to be happy, to get the course they want, job they want, person they want, everything like that. But we may have to just slow down our expectations and their expectations. And it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to have off days and off weeks. The world will keep turning and we'll get there. So there's a little bit about supporting and giving that. And it's back to the environment. Having a place with family, whoever that is, where it's safe for that child to be, where they can be calm, where they can regulate, at least in that environment. And then we can begin to look at the wider world outside for them.
So you're giving an example there of when maybe anxiety or other things going on in the teenagers that's kind of becoming a bit disabling nearly. So that's such a wide gambit from the normal exam stress.
Well, I suppose when we look at school refusal, as a parent, school's where they need to be. And we're so focused on, okay, what do we do to get you back into school?
Yeah.
How do we support you? What do we do here? We'll do shortened day. We'll drop you to school. We put in, it's back to solving all of their problems again and jumping in with all the solutions before we've actually got to the problem, which is that child just isn't in a place where they can go to school today. Maybe tomorrow, but that's okay. You know, that we might need to just haul it all back in again, sit with the problem, co-regulate with the child. And when we've managed to build that relationship, then we start working on the resolving of the issue.
That takes time as well. I was working in a CAM setting and, you know, she had been doing really well. And then she had a death in the family. And then after that, she had an argument with a young person in the yard. And that's when the predictability and the control in her world it became too much for her. So she stopped leaving the house. The world became too frightening, too scary. Those alarm bells were ringing. And everyone was so focused at getting her back to school because that's where she needed to be, like you were saying. And actually, she wasn't there at all. We had to rewind right back to that regulate. She had to be home for a little bit, getting that co-regulation, feeling that the world was safe, taking those really small steps to exposing herself to that anxiety, like walking around the block, walking inside the door actually first, then walking around the block, then going to the shop, then having an interaction before she could face going to school. It's not that big jump. It can sometimes take lots of little steps before somebody can tolerate that anxiety and can tolerate that feeling.
That's a good example. And we don't maybe think of that example. And I go back to your point, Niamh, when you're talking about, we want you to get back into school as quick as possible.
Yeah.
Oh my God, because it's like an abnormal or nothing normal in my house. Let's just keep it on the straight and narrow here. And then you said, Murren, about that takes time. I'm thinking about the parents' conversations.
There's a real parental anxiety there,
There's
isn't there?
parental anxiety, but there's also, like, parents will have to process that over time. You just think of that conversation with your parent, friend or parent that you know, and you're going, well, they're happy or they're healthy now. I know they're going to be out of school for another month, but like, you know, they're actually in a good place. When you see them on the journey, you think they've completely reconstituted the child's priorities.
It's a huge switch, isn't it? It's
Isn't
a
it?
real recalibration of your role as a parent.
Yeah.
When it's all going well, it's great and we're doing everything right. But when we hit the bump on the road, and every child is going to hit a bump on the road somewhere, whatever stage it's at. Every adult is going to hit a bump on the road as well as every child is going to hit a bump on the road. So for parents, it's about being able to manage our anxiety. And okay, our child is not going to school. Maybe that's really, really important to us. But what is more important is that we regulate ourselves. We maybe change our expectations. maybe school is still our expectation, but it might be, as Maureen says, a little bit further down the road. But we have to manage our anxiety. We have to regulate ourselves. Whatever that takes, any of the strategies we've talked about, maybe it's going and talking to somebody, maybe it's talking to the school teacher who knows your child the best, maybe it's talking to other parents who've been through the same situation, maybe it's coming to somebody in the HSE and asking for advice. But whatever we need to do as parents to regulate ourselves is really important before we support our child, or maybe in tandem with supporting our child with their anxiety.
There's that piece of regulating the self before you can even think about regulating the other, which is our young person. But I also think there's a tension there as well that can be quite tricky for parents between avoidance, and you mentioned it at the start, Virgil, is one of those things that will keep anxiety in place. It's one of the biggest maintaining factors for anxiety at any mild, moderate or severe stage. There's that tension for parents between staying where the young person is at, walking those small steps with them, but not letting them slip into that really negative cycle of avoiding. Because what avoidance does, if I never ever leave the house, then that means those threats and fears outside the house get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then feel insurmountable. So while you want to break that mountain down into smaller chunks that are manageable, so it's not about pushing them too quick, but it isn't about not pushing them at all. So there's that real tricky tension for parents, and that goes back to that connection, that regulating, moving where they're at, but you're still moving, aren't you? You're still kind of taking small steps towards managing things.
And communicating that idea to them that through your actions and through your body and through your words that you know they can do this. You know it might take a little bit of time. You're kind of looking forward in a hopeful way to a time when they'll be able to manage something that's quite tricky now, and you're putting steps in place kind of to work towards that. So as Muireann said, it's not the complete avoiding of the situation, but it's the working towards it in a hopeful way and communicating to them that you believe they can do this.
Positive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't there so much growth needed for the parent here? Like I know we're talking about anxious teenagers, and it's like, oh yeah, I'll tune into that podcast about anxious teenagers. I have an anxious teenager. But like the parent, just as much growth is happening for the parent.
And needs their support as well, because I'm thinking I have teenagers. I've been there. I've walked the walk. And I think what was super important was another adult to be able to say that's okay. Because we're there and we need to get out to work, or we need to pick up other children from school, or do all the things that we also need to do in our busy lives as parents. And what are we going to do with this teen who doesn't want to leave the house? So it's absolutely being able to access support as a parent, even if it's just a sounding board, or it's some other person who's going to help us out in that moment at that time to get the parent through. Because we do carry our child's anxiety as well.
Are there other ways that you're familiar with that the child will show that anxiety? Like I know we give the example of school refusal, but I suppose there's anything and everything and anything, is there?
Yeah, well, if you go back to that caveman fight, flight, freeze, there's also where young people actually just kind of shut down, where the anxiety is so much that actually they freeze in that moment. There's also things like we'll see our young people talking a lot and coming to you, reassurance seeking, constantly, am I okay doing this? Am I okay doing that? I've seen a lot of young people try to create things that are perfect. Oh, I'm no good at this. I have to do it perfectly, or I'm not going to do it at all. And again, that's anxiety. Not getting to sleep at night, I think, can be a big thing, particularly for adolescents, particularly when there's kind of maybe a social anxiety because they're ruminating and thinking through all those points in the day where they had contact with their peers or with someone else and thinking, God, did I do that right? Did I say that thing right? Did I say something silly there? And that can be really, really hard. You start to see the sleep disturbed. And then, of course, when that happens, there's kind of a knock-on effects from that.
The moods
and all of that. And the moods and all of that are part of puberty, are part of adolescence anyway. So then you couple that with an anxious mind and an anxious body, and it's like the perfect storm, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And maybe a little bit of tangent, but just with the moods, teenagers can say things to parents that are really hurtful.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that as parents, we kind of make room for repair for them. And this is something actually I'm reflecting on my own mum. So if we had said something, when we said something that was unpleasant to her, you could always apologise to her and know that that was absolutely the end of it. I try to do that with my own kids because I think it's a really nice message to give teenagers and children in general. You can behave in a way that's not particularly nice, but you can apologise and repair, and then we can walk away from it. Clean slate. Because there's nothing worse than teenagers feeling like, I'm going to have to hear about this now for 2 weeks, my little misdemeanour. So that makes them much less likely to apologise and repair. So the relationship then, we were talking earlier about the relationship and trying to build connections. So it's part of that building connections, making room for repair, I think.
And you want to be careful of those secondary emotions, because when we have a blow up or we have a moment where we say those hurtful things, afterwards you can get those secondary feelings like guilt and shame. And they're the ones that we don't want our young people holding on to. They're the real damaging ones for that sense of self and their further development. So like you're saying, there has to be room for them to come back and repair. And also that's modelling, and that's part of one of those how to manage anxiety is modelling for them. And that's modelling for them then what they can do with their peers. The more learning experiences they have, the more they'll bring that forward going into later life. Like you were saying, Niamh, there's going to be other hurdles. And if they have those experiences embedded in themselves, then they know how to react or how to manage something tricky when it emerges later on in life, because it will.
In terms of, you mentioned kind of self-compassion as a parent, advice for a parent. Can we give a bit more on that? And just to flag that we have a balance and stress program that's online now, and there'll be another podcast about balance and stress. It'd be useful for parents to look up. It's on the HSE website. But in terms of that self-care or self-compassion, what we've talked about there is children going through massive flux and change and events and issues and topics, and there's this happening, my friend this, my friend that, and the parent is kind of living that with them, and this is, you're on the sideline. Is it going to be a silent sideline? Are you going to be, you know what I mean? So in terms of advice for the parent, can we talk a bit about that in terms of examples of what we can encourage that parent to do? Because it sounds like if you're going to support your child on this journey, you are absolutely on a personal development journey yourself.
100%, yeah.
One thing that I've learned since becoming a parent is acknowledging that I'm bringing something to the table. So I'm bringing a set of experiences that I had growing up, a certain amount of anxieties and kind of little traps that are there for me. And acknowledging that they're there is really important, that I will be triggered, maybe by something that happens to my child or something that my child does. And that's where my regulation is going to get a little bit off balance. So I suppose some of the self-care and the compassion things that I do is my mindfulness every day. And that's something that I take really seriously. I take that pause for myself, because that's teaching my body and my mind that I have that within me to pause when I need to, if I need to react to something quite quickly. Exercise, yoga is really important.
And I think celebrating even the little small things, celebrating any of the positive things that happen. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but finding those moments of joy. Because that's the thing, we need to have joy in our children. What's the point? If it's always this really tough journey, and there's going to be tough parts of the journey, but there's going to be really joyful moments. And it's celebrating that and giving ourselves a pat on the back when this happens. Even if it's only that we sat down and we had a cup of tea together, that's positive.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a big thing, like they got whatever they wanted to do after school and they're moving on with their lives. That's super. But it's celebrating the little ones and the big moments as well, and finding the joy in our children through that.
And that cup of tea, actually, that you mentioned, I remember, working for years with parents going, you need to take a moment for yourself. So even though that cup of tea is lovely for celebrating with a young person, it's equally important for you as that pause and that self-care, and not feeling guilty or bad for taking those breaks as a parent, isn't it?
And there's something in that sensory attachment theory that says even just putting the kettle on, putting the bread in the toaster, taking out the butter, doing that with your child, having that moment, something as simple as that. Your environment is calm, you've got something to eat, you've got something calm and warm. Using all of those sensory strategies along with the emotional piece that goes along with a routine like that can be really supportive. It seems so small, but it can be such a big thing.
Yeah, it seems beautiful the way you describe it there. You're creating the regulation space.
Yeah.
And making time for the other relationships in your life as well. It's really hard when you've got a few kids and you're juggling work and you've all these things. It's really easy to lose touch with your friends, for example. But we know that that's really important to maintain connections with our own friends and to have some time with the other people in our lives, our partner, whoever it is, so that you're really working on yourself as well and your own happiness. You need to feel regulated and happy in order to kind of meet your adolescent where they're at with all of these, as we said, storms, so we want our calm to meet their storm, as Muireann said earlier. So we can't really achieve that unless we're sort of spending a little bit of time on ourselves as well.
Yeah, I'm reminded of, if you have a partner, that you need to be discussing all these things with them. And that can be a challenging space as well, where you're going, what the hell are we going to do now? And somebody has to be able to say, like you said about the change or highlighting previous achievement of a challenge. Remember when you thought nothing could be done at this stage, that you need to pull in the wins that you're mentioning there?
Absolutely. And having a plan.
Yeah.
If it's a certain time of the day that's going to be that moment when things are going to kick off, having a plan with whoever you're co-parenting with to say, okay, right, if this gets too much for me, I'm going to opt out here and you can take over. But one of us has to remain calm, and just accepting that as well, that with the best will in the world, there's going to be moments when there is rupture, and then coming back afterwards and repairing that moment. It's super to have, even if it's not somebody who's in the house with you, somebody you can call on. Is there a friend or a relative who might step in for a little while?
Yeah, it's support structure, isn't it? If you're on your own parenting, you need to pull on some sort of a support structure to help you out there. And being able to talk it out is powerful, isn't it? I feel like we've had a little counselling session. Thank you, guys. It's been emotional. But like, all joking aside, it's just such a core thing. Like, we're all parents here. So it's just so core, and it's primal to your want in life, the children to be happy. So this anxious children thing, if you hear this coming up for you, it's just, if you don't get action with it, it's going to trouble you.
Yeah. And I suppose we can't make them happy. We can sort of teach them how to make themselves happy, and also that nobody's happy all the time. But yes, when you're tied up in the emotion of that parent-child relationship, it's really hard to sort of take that bird's eye view. Really hard. And nobody can do it all the time as well. That's the other part of the self-compassion.
Just checking out as well, there are lots and lots of parenting courses. You mentioned Triple P earlier, Fergal, but there's also Parents Plus, there's Circle of Security. There's lots of different courses out there. So checking in with their local health centre to see if there's something there that might be great. And then they meet other parents in the same boat, and you're building those relationships, and you're hearing hints and tips from other people who've been where you are as well, can be really helpful.
And attendees of parenting courses often say, I got some great stuff out the facilitator, but it normalised the stuff that I was living. I didn't think it was normal. I thought I was an abnormal. So you're right, that peer interaction is so rich.
And not being afraid to reach out for support for yourself as well. So, primary care services often run stress control groups and compassion focus groups, which are really helpful for tapping into your own piece, because it's important to self-care for yourself and understand yourself so that then you can care for the other. So as a parent, it's okay to do those things. In fact, it's part of really good parenting to mind yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And we're hoping to be able to roll out that balanced stress program that I mentioned wider. It's online now, but hopefully some of that will be face-to-face in the coming time period. So we have touched on a range of different types of anxiety, and we've normalized it in the examples that you've given. But in terms of reaching for support, Maireann, you spoke earlier about when you used to work in CAMS. So when should a parent be seeking support from the GP, or whether should be going for help?
I suppose if it tips over to that moderate to severe point for the anxiety where their functioning is really, really impaired. And what I mean by that is they're not going out, they're not enjoying life, they're not able to do the things that young people and adolescents should be doing, and they need a lot of support. That's when I suppose a parent could go down to their local GP and seek some advice. A GP can refer it to their local primary care service, or they can indeed self-refer it to their local primary care service, or they can get a referral to CAMS if it is tipping over to that moderate and severe. The most important message is for parents to reach out, ask for the support. The clinicians will walk alongside them and help them in any way that they can.
Now, we should also signpost to yourmentalhealth.ie as the HSE. There's a myriad of resources there. And even if this isn't an issue for you now, have a look at that website, because I've often gone through it and gone, there's so much interesting information there. As you said there earlier, the parenting supports, if you can access them locally, they can be a huge advantage to you. So look, I just want to thank you for coming in today. Rosemary Kavanagh, Niamh Garvin and Maireann Tracy, thank you so much for coming in from the Lacala project, for sharing some of your insights and expertise in this area. It's been really, really valuable and good to listen to from a personal and professional point of view. And thanks to the listeners. If you want to learn more about HSE Health and Wellbeing, you can look us up. We're on LinkedIn and we're on X. And if you want to reach out and give us some feedback, you can email us on healthandwellbeing.communications@hse.ie. And thanks for tuning in to another episode of the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast.